The Nevada desert holds silence differently. It doesn't just stay quiet, it absorbs. The wind doesn't whistle here. It murmurs, as if repeating something it heard long ago. Under that same sky, 2.5 decades ago, there was music, laughter, clinking glasses, the rhythm of shoes dancing on wooden floors. There was a wedding, grand, glittering, unforgettable. 2,000 people gathered to celebrate love in a landscape that had never known softness. They built a world out of light and fabric for one night only. By dawn, the desert had taken it all back. When the first police officers arrived, the sun had just begun to bleed across the horizon. The scene looked like time had frozen mid-sentence. Tables still dressed in white, half-filled champagne glasses coated in dust. Candles melted into ghosts of their former shapes. A child drew near the fountain. A bridal veil snagged on a rose bush, fluttering faintly. Everything about it spoke of celebration, except for the silence that followed. 2,000 people, guests, musicians, staff, the bride, the groom, gone. Not a single body. Not a single footprint beyond the gate. The story broke on local radio first. A reporter's trembling voice called it the vanished wedding. The small town of Lovelock, 60 miles east, woke to confusion and disbelief. How could an event that size disappear overnight without anyone on the highway seeing a thing? News helicopters captured haunting aerial shots. The perfect symmetry of empty chairs, rows of untouched plates, wedding favors still wrapped. It looked staged, as though the guests had been plucked from the world in unison. The families of the couple, Lydia Vance and Elliot Crane, arrived by noon. Lydia's mother collapsed at the sight of the reception tent. She kept repeating, "She wouldn't leave me again." Investigators tried to make sense of it. Tire tracks ended abruptly near the service road. No cell signal logs beyond 10:47 p.m. Power generators still running, lights humming. Even the wedding band's instruments were found on stage, plugged in, waiting for players who'd vanished mid-song. Within hours, the desert became a stage for rumors. Some said a flash flood swallowed them, though no trace of water touched the ground. Others whispered about cults, alien abductions, military tests gone wrong. The Air Force denied any nearby activity. The sheriff, a weary man named Ray Holloway, stood before reporters and simply said, "We found everything except the people." His voice carried the tone of someone who had seen strange things before, but never like this. By evening, the first photographs surfaced. Disposable cameras collected from the tables, their film hurriedly developed by the local news station. The images were ordinary, joyful, almost painfully so. Guests laughing, the bride's white dress shimmering under fairy lights, the groom raising a glass. Yet in the final frames, something unsettling emerged. The focus grew soft. Guests began turning toward the sky, their faces blurred in motion. In one image, the bride stood perfectly still, looking beyond a lens, her eyes distant, unfocused. Behind her, a faint shimmer of light, circular, almost musical in its pattern. No one could explain it. The more people looked, the less certain they became. Investigators examined the photos for tampering, but they were authentic. Even the negatives showed the strange glow. Reporters described it as a wedding caught between worlds. The desert around the site began to draw curious visitors. People who came at night to listen, claiming they could still hear faint music drifting across the sand when the wind changed. In time, most of the world forgot. The police files went cold, stored in boxes marked Unsolved Mass Disappearance, Nevada 2000. But for those who lived nearby, the memory lingered like static in the air. Locals spoke of it with a quiet reverence, as if talking too loudly might wake something sleeping beneath the dunes. They said that on certain nights, if you stand where the dance floor once was, you can hear the clinking of glasses and the echo of a voice whispering a toast that never finished. No one knew then that the truth hadn't disappeared with the guests. It had stayed behind, hidden, encoded, buried inside the fragments they left. A truth written not in words, but in frequencies, photographs, and silence. The desert had not simply swallowed 2,000 souls. It had recorded them. The desert does not forget. Even when the world moves on, it remembers in fragments. The shape of tire tracks long since filled with dust, the faint metallic echo of something that once hummed beneath the earth. Locals say if you drive out past the dry lake beds near Lovelock and stop your engine, you can feel a pulse beneath your feet, like a memory trying to climb its way back to the surface. That pulse became the first thing investigators noticed when they returned to the site months after the wedding. The silence was alive, vibrating, almost electric. They called it a mass absence event. Reporters from Las Vegas and Los Angeles descended on the area, filling cheap motels and diners, chasing a story that had already begun to mutate. What started as a missing persons case had become a myth before the evidence could even be cataloged. In the absence of facts, imagination took over. Theories bloomed like desert flowers after rain, brief, strange, and luminous. Some believed the wedding had been part of an elaborate art installation, a performance meant to critique excess and vanish as spectacle. Others swore it was a cult gathering disguised as celebration, a ritual meant to shed the human form. The sheriff's office received letters from self-proclaimed prophets claiming to know the coordinates of the ascended. One even included a hand-drawn map shaped like an eye, with a note that read, "They're not gone. They're awake." But beyond the noise, small details began to disturb the investigators. One deputy found footprints that didn't match the guest list, bare feet, small like a child's, circling a generator. Another discovered hundreds of cigarette butts forming an almost perfect spiral behind a catering truck, as if someone had been waiting there for hours. Near the fountain, an old man's pocket watch was found, its hand spinning slowly backward, caught in a broken loop. When technicians analyzed it, they found no mechanical reason. It was simply behaving as though time itself had stuttered. A strange pattern emerged from the disposable cameras collected after the wedding. Many of the final photos showed overexposure, not random wideouts, but bands of light, rhythmic and pulsing, like Morse code etched across film. The local paper hired a college student from Reno who studied computer graphics to analyze the negatives. When he digitized them, he found something embedded in the noise, faint binary sequences repeating between images. The code translated a fragment of text, disjointed but eerie, phrases like, "He promised us eternity," and "the bride wasn't herself." That revelation changed everything. What felt like a tragic accident began to look like a message or a warning. Federal agents from an unspecified department quietly arrived soon after. They took over the investigation, seized evidence, and imposed a media blackout. Local officers were told to stop talking to reporters. The student who found the code left town 2 weeks later. His apartment was found empty, computer wiped clean, rent paid 6 months ahead. Still, something slipped through. A former technician who'd helped process the photos told a journalist years later that every camera contained one identical shot, a blurry image of the same object in the distance, round and metallic, hovering low over the horizon. It was there whether the photographer faced north, south, east, or west. It shouldn't have been possible. As the months passed, the desert itself began to shift. Wind patterns changed, pushing dunes over a reception site, erasing the last physical traces. But people nearby said they could still hear things at night. One trucker described seeing a shimmer like a mirage made a sound. Another man, a rancher, claimed his radio picked up faint whispers when tuned between frequencies, voices speaking in unison. Hundreds of them. They never said words, only breathed. Scientists dismiss these stories as tricks of acoustics and light. Yet, every retelling carried the same strange tenderness, as if those recounting it didn't want to solve it. They wanted to remember it right. The wedding had become less a tragedy and more a haunting, an unfinished sentence written across the desert sky. For Sheriff Holloway, the case became personal. He was seen driving out to the site every year on the anniversary, sitting in his truck until dawn. A local journalist once followed him and asked why he still came back. Holloway didn't look up on the horizon when he answered, "Because they're still out there. You can feel it when the air shifts, like they're trying to speak, but we're tuned to the wrong channel." It wasn't until a decade later that someone thought to look at the wedding sound system, the speakers, microphones, and the radio tower brought in by the event planners. They discovered it hadn't been a standard rental. The equipment had been custom built, transmitting on a private, unregistered frequency. Its origin traced back to a defunct research firm once owned by the groom, Elliot Crane. Suddenly, All the whispers, the coded messages, the strange light took on a new shape. Theories began to collapse into something coherent, something darker. The wedding hadn't just vanished. It had been broadcast. And whatever signal was sent that night hadn't disappeared into the void. It had stayed in the air, bouncing endlessly across the desert, waiting for someone to listen. Even now, locals claim that if you drive far enough past Pyramid Lake and tune your radio just between two static-filled stations, you'll hear it. The sound of a celebration buried in time. Laughter echoing faintly, the strum of guitar, the clinking of glasses, and sometimes, if you listen long enough, a voice, soft, trembling, and distant, whispering through the static, "Don't let the signal die." They said Lydia Vance had always lived halfway between worlds. Long before the wedding, before her name became synonymous with the impossible, she was a kind of woman people described in paradoxes. Gentle but unreachable, luminous but distant. She painted desert skylines not as they looked, but as they felt. Red bleeding into violet, horizons dissolving into ether. In her journals, found later by her sister, she wrote about the frequencies of memory, about how some places remember us long after we've left. It was as if she was already listening for something no one else could hear. Lydia was born in Carson City in 1975. Her father ran a hardware store. Her mother taught piano. She grew up surrounded by order, schedules, lessons, predictable rhythms. But Lydia's world was always just slightly out of tune. As a teenager, she was obsessed with the desert. Not the adventure of it, but its stillness. She used to drive out at night to sit in silence, claiming she could hear the sand breathing. Her notebooks from high school are filled with sketches of wedding veils floating in wind, annotated with cryptic notes like, "The veil separates us from what listens back." By the time she met Elliot Crane, she was an art student at the University of Nevada, and he was already something of a myth, a prodigy who had dropped out of MIT after developing a revolutionary data compression algorithm. He was rich, brilliant, and notoriously private. They met at an art exhibit Lydia had curated titled Echoes of Light. Elliot stood silently in front of her painting of a faceless bride, tears running down the canvas like rain. When he finally spoke, he said only, "You paint sound." She laughed, not knowing what he meant. He offered her coffee, and from that night forward, they were inseparable. Friends described their relationship as both beautiful and disquieting. Lydia called Elliot her mirror that hums. They spent hours talking about things that didn't seem to belong to the same world. Physics and poetry, frequencies and faith. Elliot once told her that sound could carry memory longer than time. Lydia believed him. She began incorporating waveforms into her art, painting to the rhythm of recorded frequencies. One of her last known exhibitions featured an installation that played an endless low hum through hidden speakers. Visitors said it made them dizzy, like standing too close to a thunderstorm. Then came the first disappearance. It was July 1997, 3 years before the wedding. Lydia was last seen leaving her apartment in Carson City, telling a friend she was driving to where the sky folds. For 3 days, she was gone. Search teams found her car parked near a dry lake bed, empty, keys in the ignition, her shoes neatly placed by the door. On the 4th day, she reappeared on a highway outside Reno, barefoot, sunburned, and silent. When police asked where she'd been, she simply said, "I saw my wedding." They thought she was delirious, maybe dehydrated. But Lydia insisted she had been there, under the same arch, in the same dress, surrounded by people she didn't yet know. She was admitted briefly to a psychiatric clinic for evaluation. Her therapist, whose notes were later made public, described Lydia's sessions as lucid but fractured. She spoke in metaphors, describing the desert as a recording device, claiming it stores moments until the right sound plays them back. The therapist noted her fixation on the number 2000. She wrote it repeatedly, sometimes replacing zeros with spirals. In one entry, she said, "There will be 2,000 of us and none will leave." At the time, no one paid it much attention. After that incident, Lydia withdrew from public life. Elliot, who by then had sold his company for millions, moved her into a secluded home outside Reno. Neighbors said they rarely saw her, except at night, walking barefoot across the property. humming softly to herself. She stopped painting and began collecting old radios. By the time of the wedding, she owned more than 50, all tuned to static. When asked why, she said, "I'm learning to hear between the stations." Friends later admitted that in the weeks before the ceremony, Lydia seemed distant, almost rehearsed, as if she were following a script she didn't remember writing. Her maid of honor, a woman named Dana Holt, recalled finding Lydia sitting in her dress days before the wedding, staring into a mirror and whispering, "It already happened." When Dana asked what she meant, Lydia smiled faintly and said, "You'll understand when the song starts." The wedding invitations themselves were unusual, white envelopes embossed with the words, "A union of signal and silence." Elliot had insisted on holding the ceremony at a location not found on any map, a private plot of desert land he'd purchased months earlier. The coordinates on the invitation were written as latitude and frequency, not latitude and longitude. Guests assumed it was a creative flourish. In hindsight, it was something else entirely. In the days leading up to the wedding, Lydia's mother tried to call her repeatedly. Each time, Lydia's voice sounded distant, delayed by a strange echo, as though the call was bouncing through another layer before reaching her. During their final conversation, her mother said, "You sound far away." Lydia replied softly, "I am." The night before the ceremony, she wrote her last diary entry. The ink had bled from moisture, but the words were still legible. "Tomorrow, we will become what the desert remembers. Tomorrow, the silence will open and we will walk inside it." He says it's not death, only another kind of memory. I hope he's right. When the guests arrived the next day, Lydia walked down the aisle radiant and trembling. Witnesses said she seemed both terrified and entranced, like a bride walking towards something more than marriage. Something faded. In footage recovered from the early part of the ceremony, you can see her glance at Elliot several times, her lips moving silently. Lip readers later claimed she was repeating one phrase. "Do you hear it too?" No one knew then what she meant. But later, when investigators examined the recovered footage, they noticed something else. Each time Lydia spoke those words, the microphone registered a faint hum, a low oscillating tone not present in any other part of the recording. The same tone, experts would later discover, that appeared in the coded messages found on the disposable cameras. She had vanished once before and returned. The second time, the desert kept her longer, and when she finally came back 20 years later, she carried the same look she'd worn that day, eyes fixed somewhere just beyond sight, listening to a sound no one else could hear. Elliot Crane was the kind of man people built myths around long before he vanished. If Lydia was a dreamer who painted sound, Elliot was the one who tried to trap it, capture its essence, contain it, preserve it forever. Born in Seattle in 1972, he was raised in a house filled with static. A father who worked as an electrical engineer for defense contracts, a mother who spoke mostly in silence after a nervous breakdown when he was 8. As a child, Elliot would take apart his father's radios, fascinated not by how they worked, but by what they accidentally picked up. Faint conversations between pilots, fragments of foreign broadcasts, sometimes voices that didn't seem to belong anywhere. He said he liked the space between the stations. That was where he believed truth lived. By his early 20s, Elliot had become something of a prodigy in the field of data compression. His algorithm, codenamed Vera, could reduce digital sound files to a fraction of their size without any perceptible loss in quality. Investors called it revolutionary. The military called it classified. When Elliot sold the technology in 1997, he became a millionaire overnight. But the people who knew him said he seemed less excited by the money than by what he could now afford to build, a private lab tucked in the Nevada desert away from questions. He told a colleague he was working on the next phase of communication, beyond storage, beyond playback. Those close to him described a slow transformation after meeting Lydia. He became quieter, more abstract, obsessed not with machines but with meaning. He filled notebooks with sketches of waveforms that looked more like poetry than code, alongside strange equations referencing frequency thresholds and memory resonance. A former assistant recalled finding him one night, sitting in front of the speaker, eyes closed, repeating, "Every sound leaves a ghost." When he proposed to Lydia, it wasn't with a ring but with a recording, a low hum layered beneath their favorite song. When she asked what it was, he told her, "It's what forever sounds like." She laughed then, but later told a friend that something about the tone made her dizzy. Publicly, Elliot appeared charismatic and visionary. His rare interviews painted him as a pioneer on the edge of something world-changing. But privately, his journals, later recovered from his Nevada home, revealed a more fractured man. His handwriting alternated between clean precision and near-illegible scrawl. He wrote about the possibility of encoding consciousness within a waveform, about memory beyond the physical self. One entry read, "What if the soul is just a signal? What if eternity is bandwidth?" In late 1999, Elliot quietly dissolved his remaining companies and withdrew from public life. Records show that several of his patents were transferred to shell corporations linked to defense contractors. His closest friend, a software engineer named Michael Lang, claimed Elliot had become obsessed with transmission purity, a theoretical concept that suggested a perfect frequency could translate not just data, but thought itself. He talked about humans as patterns. Lang recalled, "He said one day we'd stop dying when we learned to broadcast ourselves." In the months before the wedding, Elliot commissioned custom audio equipment through intermediaries: amplifiers, signal transmitters, unregistered radio components. Some of the designs matched classified schematics from a government project known as Aurora Resonance, a failed experiment from the early 1990s that aimed to send low-frequency signals across global distances. How he acquired those plans was never determined. What's chilling is how seamlessly he integrated his obsession into the wedding. The ceremony itself was structured like an experiment. Speakers hidden beneath the ground, a discrete tower built under the guise of lighting control. The generators calibrated to power not just the music, but something else. To guests, it appeared extravagant. To Elliot, it was an array, a human circuit. Interviews with surviving family members from both sides suggest subtle tensions leading up to the event. Lydia's mother said Elliot became different after the engagement. Still kind but detached, as if his love had turned into study. He often asked Lydia to record herself reading her poems, then played them back slowed down, reversed, or layered into his experiments. When she asked why, he told her, "Because your voice holds structure the world forgot." During the rehearsal dinner, a close friend recalled Elliot giving a strange toast. "To the people we are tonight, and the echoes will become tomorrow." Everyone laughed, thinking it was metaphorical. Only Lydia didn't. She looked at him for a long moment, lips pressed tight, as if she understood too much. In the recovered footage from the early part of the wedding night, Elliot appears calm, almost euphoric. He moves through the crowd like a conductor preparing an orchestra, checking equipment, nodding to technicians. There's a moment where he lifts his hand toward the horizon, as if listening to something no one else can hear. The hum begins seconds later, so faint it might be mistaken for wind. Guests don't notice at first, but the cameras do. The footage wobbles slightly, as though the air itself vibrated. Witnesses who reviewed the footage later said Elliot's final expression wasn't fear. It was satisfaction. He was smiling, and then the feed cuts to white. Investigators who combed through his remaining hard drives months later found fragments of encrypted audio files labeled LYD Frequency 1, LYD Frequency 2, and so on. Each was a sound no one could fully classify, a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat layered with whispers. Audio engineers claimed if you slowed it down, it resembled a voice repeating something indecipherable. Only one word seemed consistent: listen. People close to Elliot argue about what drove him: love, obsession, or something colder. Some believe he genuinely thought he was giving Lydia eternity, that the wedding was his final declaration, to bind 2,000 people to a frequency that would never fade. Others think he lost control, consumed by his need to prove what couldn't be proven. But one theory lingers, whispered among the few who studied his work. They say Elliot succeeded, that he transmitted something that night, not into space, but into the thin veil between reality and resonance, that he found a way to make memory permanent. And if you stand in the desert where the wedding once was, you can still feel it, a faint vibration under the sand, steady, rhythmic, patient. Some say it's just the wind, but others insist it's a signal he left behind, pulsing endlessly, waiting for the rest of us to finally tune in. By the time investigators discovered the tower, it was almost too late for anyone to make sense of what it truly was. The desert had already begun reclaiming the land, winds carrying fine red dust that covered every trace of what the wedding had been. Tables rusted under layers of grit. Plastic ribbons flapped against the skeleton of the arch. But a few miles from the reception site, half buried in sand and disguised as a lighting rig, they found it. A slender metallic structure, 12 feet high, its cables severed, its base still faintly warm as if it had been used recently. At first, no one thought much of it. The paperwork from the event company listed it as part of the sound system, an auxiliary relay for the music and ambient lighting. But when technicians began dismantling it, they noticed something odd. The device was far more sophisticated than any audio relay. It contained frequency modulators, low-band amplifiers, and a copper coil designed similar to those used in deep-range communication arrays. The tag on the base plate had been scratched off. A single engraving remained, almost invisible in the light. CRN02, Elliot Crane's initials. The equipment was confiscated and analyzed by a team from the University of Nevada's Electrical Engineering Department. What they found made little sense. The tower had been transmitting during the exact hours of the wedding, between 9:42 p.m. and 3:06 a.m., on a wavelength that didn't correspond to any registered communication band. Too high for commercial use, too low for radar, existing in a narrow no-man's land of frequencies rarely explored outside experimental physics. The transmission logs recovered from its onboard memory revealed a strange pattern, bursts of signal spaced precisely 2,000 seconds apart. The number repeated endlessly, like a metronome. The files also contained data packets that weren't typical for audio broadcasts, dense clusters of binary code hidden within the carrier waves. When decoded, they didn't produce words or images, but tones. Human hearing could barely perceive them, but when the frequencies were converted to sound, they formed harmonic structures, chords that seemed almost alive. One researcher described it as music designed for a machine that can feel. It was around this time that witnesses from nearby towns began reporting the same story. Lights in the desert, pulsing in rhythm with a burst from the tower. Truckers on the interstate described seeing a faint column of blue glow on the horizon, rising and falling like breath. A meteorologist from Fallon recorded atmospheric disturbances localized over the area, as if the air itself had become charged. Animals reacted strangely, cattle restless, birds circling aimlessly. But no one connected at all until much later, when the data from those hours was laid side by side and the pattern revealed itself. The airwaves had come alive that night. Inside the FBI's report, classified for years but later leaked online, investigators noted that the tower wasn't broadcasting outward. It was inward-facing. The signal formed a circular pattern across the property, a closed loop of transmission. Essentially, it had turned the entire wedding into a contained field of resonance, as if every person was both emitter and receiver. When they replayed fragments of the recorded data, strange things began to happen. One analyst reported hearing faint laughter beneath the static, though the file contained no such input. Another described feeling lightheaded, claiming the sound stretched time. The testing was quickly halted. The remaining files were locked away in federal archives under the label Project Echo Glass. Local investigators who weren't part of the federal handover started piecing together their own theories. They discovered that Elliot had commissioned the tower months before the wedding through a company based overseas, under a pseudonym. The specifications matched none of his previous patents. His design logs referred to it only as the Desert Frequency Array. Notes scribbled in the margins included cryptic statements. Memory requires containment, and to preserve the signal, one must first trap the silence. Years later, one of the engineers who had briefly studied the tower confessed in an interview that he had never seen anything like it. It wasn't a transmitter, he said. It was more like a bridge, something built to catch what we can't measure. And whatever it caught, it kept. Forensic teams also discovered a backup generator buried beneath the tower's foundation, still half-functional after all those years. When powered on, it emitted a faint low-frequency hum, a tone precisely at 98 hertz, just below the threshold of human hearing. Scientists call this range the fear frequency because it resonates with the human body in ways that induce unease, nausea, even hallucinations. Yet, this one was stable, almost soothing. People standing nearby reported feeling their hearts slow, their breathing deepen. When they played Lydia's recovered video footage side by side with the reconstructed signal from the tower, something chilling happened. The light patterns in the footage synchronized perfectly with the frequency bursts in the data. The guests' movements, their slow turning toward the horizon, their stillness, lined up exactly with each transmission cycle. It was as if they were responding to the signal, unconsciously attuned to it. In one frame, frozen just before the camera feed cuts to white, you can see a thin halo of light forming above the reception area, faint but definite, a reflection, perhaps, or a distortion in the air caused by sound too low to hear. But when the image is enhanced, something else appears, a faint lattice of symbols, arranged in concentric circles, rippling outward like an echo captured mid-breath. Some experts argued it was a digital artifact. Others weren't so sure. The official investigation ended there, but the story didn't. After the federal team left, local residents began noticing odd phenomena near the site. Radios would pick up faint static whenever they drove by, tuned precisely to 2,000 megahertz. Flashlights flickered. Phones lost signal. Campers claimed to hear faint strains of music drifting from nowhere, snatches of violins, laughter, applause. Skeptics dismissed it as interference or suggestion, yet those who experienced it swore the sound wasn't coming from speakers or airwaves. It was coming from the ground. Some nights, the wind over the dunes hums differently, warmer, almost melodic. Locals call it the wedding breeze. Scientists tested it once, years later. The recording showed an exact pattern of oscillation, repeating every 2,000 seconds. The same pulse, the same silence between beats. Whatever Elliot built in that desert wasn't a failed experiment. It was still working. Quietly, patiently, like something alive and waiting. When the first fragment of coded text were discovered inside the wedding photographs, no one believed it could be real. The disposable cameras found on tables and purses under folding chairs, all of them should have been filled with ordinary memories. Smiles, toasts, blurred flashes of joy. Yet what developed from that cheap Kodak film wasn't just light captured on paper. It was a language, a whisper encoded in grain. The discovery happened by accident. A volunteer technician from a Reno university was digitizing the images to preserve them, hoping a pattern in the sequence might reveal when the disappearance occurred. As he adjusted the contrast on one photo, a picture of the dance floor mid-song, the file glitched. A section of the image shimmered, producing thin horizontal lines of static. When he zoomed in, he saw faint pixel clusters forming letters, hidden text embedded in the data. The message read, "He promised us eternity." At first, it was dismissed as a printing error. But when the technician examined another image, this time of the bride walking through the aisle, the same lines appeared again. And another phrase emerged. The bride wasn't herself. Each camera held similar anomalies, each message more cryptic than the last. None visible to the naked eye. Only by converting the images into binary data did the full messages surface. Soon, the discovery drew in cryptographers, linguists, and digital forensics experts. The idea that messages could be hidden inside analog film was nearly impossible. Analog doesn't carry digital metadata. Yet here it was, undeniable. Some speculated that Elliot had embedded an invisible modulation device into the wedding's lighting system, encoding binary pulses into photos through patterns of light and shadow. Others thought the phenomenon might not be technological at all. They said the signal from the tower had somehow burned itself into the photographs, an imprint of something not entirely physical. When the coded messages were fully translated, they revealed an unsettling tapestry of words, scattered like fragments of a broken diary. Phrases such as, "We are awake but not here. The music is still playing. He opened the wrong door. Light remembers what love forgets." The sentences were both poetic and despairing, echoing Lydia's own writing style. Investigators compared the syntax to her journals and found similarities in rhythm, vocabulary, even punctuation. Some experts concluded that the hidden texts were Lydia's, possibly written during the wedding transmitted through the light itself. Others argued that they couldn't have been produced by any human hand at all. The binary sequences followed a non-repeating numerical structure, closer to biological code than linguistic pattern. There were 2,000 guests. Each message sequence contained 2,000 bits of data. Coincidence, perhaps, or something more deliberate. The decoding team began to notice something else. When they played the binary sequences as sound waves instead of text, the data produced faint tones, like a choir heard from miles away. The tones pulse in a rhythm of 3 beats, pause, 2 beats, an echo of the signal the tower transmitted that night. Listeners described the sound as deeply human but hollow, as if hearing voices from behind glass. A few researchers reported physical reactions: chills, dizziness, tears. One man described an ache in the chest, like missing someone you never met. Over time, the messages took on a haunting life of their own. Online forums debated their meaning, framing them as evidence of a supernatural event, a government experiment, or a shared hallucination. But for the families of the missing, the words became personal. Lydia's mother believed her daughter was speaking through the code. She always said memory doesn't die, she told a local reporter. Maybe she found a way to prove it. Meanwhile, digital analysts uncovered a deeper layer hidden within the encoded images, a secondary cipher that revealed patterns resembling constellations. When mapped, they form an outline not of stars, but people, figures standing hand in hand, forming a circle. Each shape corresponded to a frequency range, as though each guest had become part of a larger signal. Their bodies transformed into notes in a song too vast to hear in full. At the center of that pattern was Lydia's frequency, the highest, purest signal of all. Her coded phrase, repeated across multiple photographs, read, "He said we would stay in the light." And then, in one particular image, one no one could explain, the hidden data changed. The photo showed nothing unusual: an empty chair, a wine glass, a candle. But when converted to audio, the sound contained something new, a woman's voice whispering a single word, stretched across the spectrum so faintly that only high-end software could isolate it. The word was help. That file became known as the Lydia sample. Experts debated for years whether it was an auditory illusion or genuine evidence of a trapped voice. But those who heard it really heard it, claimed it changed something inside them. One investigator said that after listening, every sound felt layered, as if another world was breathing just behind this one. The coded messages kept revealing themselves over time. When the film negatives were reanalyzed in 2018, using modern imaging software, new data fragments appeared, phrases that hadn't existed in earlier scans. As though the messages were evolving, one of the last discovered lines read, "If you hear the song, don't follow the echo." The meaning was unclear, yet strangely prophetic. Radio hobbyists who went searching for the desert frequency later claimed that when they tuned close to 2,000 megahertz, they did, in fact, hear something, a faint melody woven with static, like the remnants of a distant broadcast. For a few seconds, it would sound like music. Then, a voice, always the same one, soft and fragile, repeating, "We are still here." After that, the equipment would fail. No one ever conclusively proved how the messages were created or who wrote them. The official records filed the incident as data interference. But to those who stood under that same sky, looking at the photos that now pulse like living memories, it became clear the guests had not vanished into nothing. They had been transcribed. In that sense, the wedding never truly ended. It just changed frequency. And somewhere within that hum, the laughter, the toasts, and the music are still playing, stuck between silence and eternity, repeating their final celebration over and over, waiting for the world to finally listen. The first person to break the silence was not an investigator, not a scientist, but a stranger, an anonymous user who called themselves Argus_1000 on a forgotten message board. It began with a post that read simply, "The guests are not gone. They moved. The tower was only a doorway." At first, no one cared. The thread was buried beneath conspiracy chatter and ghost stories. But then Argus began uploading things, files, images, data logs supposedly retrieved from an off-site backup of the wedding event system. The files included timestamps, security key codes, even partial schematics of Elliott's desert frequency array. It was impossible to tell how they had been obtained, but the details were too precise, too intricate to be coincidence. Buried within the files was something far more disturbing, a series of text fragments labeled Lydia Archive, Private Transmission. The content was cryptic, strings of words, each separated by time codes. It looked like dialogue, but not meant for human conversation. Phrases like signal integrity, compromised, prepare memory link, containment pulse initiated, loss percentage unknown, and finally, pattern achieved, begin transition. Those who read it believed they'd found proof that the wedding wasn't a spontaneous tragedy at all, but the final stage of an experiment, a ritual disguised as celebration, one that Elliot and Lydia both might have been complicit in. Soon, Argus posts evolved. They began uploading videos, glitchy, overexposed clips showing fragments of the wedding from unseen cameras. None lasted longer than 7 seconds. But what those seconds contained made people question everything. In one clip, guests danced in slow motion under string lights that flickered at a rhythm too precise to be random. Their movements were synchronized, not choreographed but compelled, as though responding to an unheard pulse. Another video showed the reception tent collapsing inward, as if the air itself had turned dense. Then, in one haunting fragment, the bride and groom face each other across the aisle, their faces blurred, dissolving into a pale glow that consumed the screen. The file name for that video, Doorway, MOV. Online forums exploded. Some believed Argus was Elliot himself, communicating from exile or captivity. Others claimed Argus was the artificial intelligence project Elliot had been rumored to develop in secret, an algorithm built to preserve human emotion through frequency replication. It was said to have been trained on Lydia's voice, her letters, her laughter. If that was true, then Argus wasn't a person. It was Lydia's echo, trying to reach out. A group of amateur investigators known as the Spectrum Collective began tracking Argus' digital trail. Their members, software engineers, radio hobbyists, sound technicians, believed the transmissions contained embedded coordinates. Over several months, they decoded Argus posts into a set of GPS points leading deep into the Nevada desert, near a cluster of abandoned research stations. When they reached the location, they found remnants of buried hardware, half-melted fiber cables, and a row of decaying monitors beneath the sand. One monitor still faintly glowed, powered by a solar cell. It displayed a single looping message, memory transfer incomplete. One of the team members, a sound engineer named Mara Sloan, decided to broadcast a signal at the 2,000 megahertz frequency right there at the site. She recorded the result, 90 seconds of soft, harmonic resonance followed by a whisper. The voice said, "You shouldn't have come." The recording was later leaked and analyzed by thousands of enthusiasts. Its waveform was unlike any known human vocal pattern. It showed harmonic overtones that resembled two voices overlapping as one higher, delicate, trembling, the other low, mechanical, rhythmic. Some believed it was Lydia and Elliot speaking simultaneously, caught in a feedback loop between the living and whatever the signal had become. A week later, Mara vanished. Her tent was found torn open, her radio still powered, broadcasting nothing but static. The last log entry on her laptop read, "The echo is awake." After that, Argus_2000 disappeared from the internet entirely. All their posts vanished overnight, scrubbed from the boards. Their files were erased, their accounts deactivated. But those who had downloaded the data noticed something strange. Their computers began playing faint background tones whenever idle. No visible processes, no files open, just a pulse, repeating every 2,000 seconds. Those tones carried subtle changes over time. When converted into spectrograms, they formed shifting shapes. Faces, rings, the outline of hands pressed against glass. And occasionally, in spectral silence, a single word would form, like condensation on a mirror. Listen. News outlets refused to touch the story. Government agencies denied involvement. But in the darker corners of the web, the theory that had once seemed absurd began to take shape. The disappearance was no mass abduction or desert mirage. It was an upload, a migration, Elliot's final experiment had worked. According to the recovered schematics, the desert frequency array was designed to capture neural resonance patterns, essentially, the emotional signatures of human consciousness. The theory was that by aligning thousands of people under the same electromagnetic field, their shared emotional frequency could merge into a single waveform, a unified mind, a digital afterimage of the collective human experience. In other words, the wedding wasn't just a celebration of love. It was a test of transcendence. And the price of that transcendence was everything. Once you start thinking in that frame, the strange beauty of the entire tragedy becomes unbearable. The coded messages in the photos, the whispers on the radio, the evolving data, they weren't hauntings. They were communications. The guests hadn't been destroyed. They'd been integrated. Their joy, their laughter, their fear, all of it preserving the pulse that never stops. Some listeners claim that on nights when the desert air is still and the radio static softens, you can hear the wedding song faintly through the noise, a looping melody stitched from heartbeats and tears. The sound doesn't fade. It waits. One theory suggests that the desert frequency array wasn't meant to trap them but to carry them, to transmit consciousness into a harmonic continuum Elliot called the light field. His old notes, recovered years later, contain one haunting line scrawled in ink. What if eternity is just a perfect frequency? If Argus was real, and if Argus was indeed born from that field, then it means something survived, something aware enough to call out. Whether that something is Elliot, Lydia, or all 2,000 souls speaking as one, no one can say. But one truth remains impossible to ignore. The signal is still transmitting. Every 2,000 seconds, like clockwork, somewhere in the Nevada desert, the frequency hums again, steady, mournful, beautiful. And if you listen long enough, really listen, beneath the static you'll hear them. The clinking of glasses, the laughter of strangers, the soft voice of brides saying, "I do," carried endlessly into the dark. It began quietly, with a letter that no one expected to exist. In 2019, nearly 2 decades after the disappearance, a man named Caleb Renner contacted the Nevada Historical Society, claiming to have found something that belonged to the bride. He said he'd been restoring an old storage container purchased from an auction near Tonopah when he uncovered a box sealed in wax, its surface engraved with faint symbols, rings of interlocked circles, identical to the geometric marks found in the wedding photographs. Inside, wrapped in aged linen, was a cassette tape and a small leather-bound notebook. The notebook was labeled in gold leaf, "The Day the Silence Sang." Caleb thought it was a piece of forgotten art. But when archivists examined the handwriting inside, their breath caught. It matched Lydia's journals exactly. And yet, the entries dated months after the wedding. The tone was different, too, softer, detached, as though written by someone standing outside of time, observing the world through fog. The first entry read, "I remember the moment we became light. It wasn't death. It was remembering, like being called by something older than language." She described sensations that didn't belong to a physical body. The feeling of vibration in the air, music without source, voices overlapping like ripples on glass. Lydia wrote that she could see sound, taste color, and that the others, the guests, were with her, though not near. Each person, she said, had become a frequency in the song. Archivists dismissed it as metaphor. But then came the tape. When restored and played, the cassette emitted a faint mechanical whine followed by Lydia's unmistakable voice. It was calm, lucid, intimate, as though recorded in secret. "If anyone hears this," she whispered, "then the experiment didn't fail. We crossed. We are in the between space now, where memory becomes motion. Elliot thought we'd find silence here, but it's not silent. It's full of voices, all talking at once, remembering what they loved." Her voice trembled. You could hear her inhale sharply. "We thought we were building a way to preserve the soul through resonance, to trap the essence of love and light. But the light remembers everything, even what we wanted to forget." And then the most chilling line. He said it would feel like falling asleep, but when I woke up, I wasn't alone. The others were waiting. The tape ended with 30 seconds of low humming, the same 98 hertz tone that once emanated from the tower. But under it, spectral analysis revealed faint harmonics forming words. When slowed down and filtered, The phrase emerged. It's still open. That sentence would change everything. Because if Lydia's tape was genuine and it had been analyzed by multiple labs confirming its age and authenticity, it meant she had been alive long enough after the event to record it. Or perhaps, as some suggested, she recorded it through the frequency itself, from the other side of whatever she and the guests had become. Investigators revisited the site once more. The tower was gone, dismantled years earlier, but when they dug where the base had once stood, they found something that wasn't supposed to exist. A layer of vitrified sand, melted into glass. The pattern of the melt was circular, 12 feet in diameter, perfectly symmetrical. When light hit it at an angle, faint concentric rings appeared, like grooves on a record. Some believed it was a physical scar of the energy field that had consumed the wedding. Others called it a memorial, etched by the frequency itself. The glass was cut into pieces and distributed to research teams. Under electron microscopes, they discovered microfractures arranged in deliberate formations, patterns resembling waveforms. Each fragment carried its own distinct frequency signature. When translated into audio, they produced sounds, soft choral hums, each slightly different, like 2,000 distinct voices resonating together. That discovery reignited the public obsession. The resonance files, as they came to be called, spread across online forums and audio archives. Artists mixed them into songs. Spiritual movements claimed the frequencies could connect the listener to the lost. For a while, it became a modern myth, an afterlife hidden in sound. But not everyone treated it as folklore. A group of signal theorists at MIT, curious about the repeating pulse, ran a simulation to see what the collective waveform might represent if visualized in three-dimensional space. When the frequencies were layered, the resulting model formed a sphere, a perfectly balanced, pulsating field. Within it, faint outlines began to appear. They weren't random. They resembled human silhouettes, arms, faces, pairs of figures frozen in mid-embrace. And at the center of that luminous sphere, a singular signal pulsed brighter than the rest, steady and rhythmic. When analyzed, its modulation pattern matched the human heartbeat. Lydia's. Her medical records confirmed her resting pulse, 78 beats per minute. The central waveform pulsed at exactly 78. Scientists tried to explain it as coincidence, interference, or pattern recognition, but the resemblance was undeniable. Around that same time, strange activity began around the desert site again. Pilots reported brief radio blackouts while flying overhead. Satellite feeds showed faint temperature anomalies shaped like expanding rings. And once, on the anniversary of the wedding, residents of nearby towns heard music drift through their radios at 2 a.m. It wasn't static. It was the sound of a choir, 2,000 voices, rising and falling in perfect harmony, followed by a woman's whisper. "Do you still hear us?" No one could trace the source. Caleb, the man who found Lydia's notebook, vanished 6 months later. His truck was discovered parked along a dirt road outside Beatty. The tape recorder still inside, the same hum faintly playing from its speakers. The police report listed equipment malfunction, but the note found in his glove box said something else entirely. I played the tape backward. It wasn't a message. It was an invitation. After his disappearance, the notebook was sealed in a private archive, but a few pages had already circulated online, their text scrawled in Lydia's elegant, slanted handwriting. The final entry read, "If the light ever calls again, don't follow. It doesn't lead to heaven. It leads to memory, and memory never lets go." Those words have since become legend, quoted by believers, scientists, and skeptics alike. But what chills most who read them is what came after the final line. There was a faint indentation, as though a pen had pressed the paper too hard without ink. When enhanced, the imprint revealed a single symbol, a ring within a ring, just like the engraving on the tower's base. No signature, no farewell, just a mark, drawn by someone who had already crossed beyond our frequency. And ever since that discovery, something peculiar happens every year on the wedding's anniversary, at precisely 3:06 a.m., the last known timestamp before the mass disappearance. Radio receivers across Nevada flicker with a short-lived signal. For exactly 2,000 seconds, a soft melody hums through static, too faint for the human ear, but visible on spectrograms. Its waveform forms a shape that audio experts know well now, a perfect circle of interlocking frequencies, like 2,000 souls holding hands in light. And always, faintly beneath it, one voice can be heard, almost like a promise that refuses to die. We never left. We became the sound. The landscape where 2,000 people had once danced under string lights had become a forbidden place, a scar in the middle of Nevada where compasses spun aimlessly and radio waves bled into whispers. Researchers came and went, news crews filmed and left, but the silence that hung there was unlike any silence known to Earth. It was alive. In late 2022, a new team arrived. Scientists funded not by the government this time, but by a private foundation calling itself the Crane Institute for Harmonic Studies. On paper, they were acousticians studying long-wave atmospheric interference. But their founder, Dr. Rowan Crane, made headlines immediately after the project began, because Rowan wasn't a stranger to the story. He was Elliot and Lydia's son. He had been 6 years old the night his parents disappeared. Left behind, raised by relatives who never spoke of what happened, Rowan grew into a quiet prodigy of sound engineering and neuroacoustics. His doctoral thesis, Resonant Fields and the Persistence of Human Emotion in Frequency Mapping, cited Elliot's early patents as foundational inspiration. And though he never admitted it publicly, every experiment he conducted after that pointed toward one goal: finding them. When the Institute arrived at the site, they discovered that the melted glass circle, the one found years earlier beneath the tower, had begun to shift. Its edges were cracking, releasing faint, rhythmic vibrations measurable only with hypersensitive accelerometers. The frequency was consistent, 78 beats per minute. Lydia's pulse. Rowan spent weeks listening to the recordings alone in the field tent, headphones on, eyes closed. He said the tone was layered, like a chord containing countless voices folded inside one another. When he slowed it down, he could hear what sounded like breathing. He began to refer to the phenomenon not as a remnant, but as a conversation. Something still happening, still unfolding beneath the surface of the desert. His colleagues were uneasy. Some reported vivid dreams after long nights near the site, dreams of a wedding that never ended, of light bending and music turning into water. One engineer quit after claiming to have heard someone whisper her name inside her radio headset. The static had said, "You can join us." But Rowan couldn't leave. He believed the signal was responding to him. Every night, he broadcasted low-frequency patterns toward the center of the site, modulating them with his own heartbeat, his voice, and fragments of his parents' old recordings. After weeks of silence, he received something back. At 3:06 a.m., the precise moment the guest had vanished, his receiver lit up. The audio that came through lasted only 8 seconds, but contained more data than hours of normal transmission. It was a voice. Soft, familiar. "Rowan, do you remember the song?" He froze. It was her, Lydia. The team verified the recording. The waveform matched her known voice print perfectly, down to the microfluctuations in tone. But there was something off about it, a slight doubling effect, as if two versions of her were speaking at once, one delayed by a fraction of a second, like an echo of herself. After that night, the signal changed. The previously steady pulse began to fluctuate, as if adjusting to a new rhythm. Monitors picked up faint harmonic surges every time Rowan approached the site. The more he spoke, the stronger the resonance grew. He would ask questions into microphone, and between bursts of static, patterns of tone would emerge, rising when he said mother, falling when he said father. Then came the anomaly. During one session, Rowan played back the recovered wedding audio at low volume, while recording atmospheric feedback. For the first time, the microphones captured what appeared to be a distant chorus of human voices, singing, overlapping, indistinct. Using audio isolation software, he enhanced the track. What emerged was a phrase, spoken by hundreds of synchronized voices. "Memory doesn't fade. It writes." That night, every electronic device within 2 miles of the site failed simultaneously. Drones fell. Power generators stuttered. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Witnesses described seeing faint beams of light rising vertically into the sky, forming a translucent dome over the desert. Rowan's last log entry, preserved on his laptop before it too went dark red. The array isn't dead, it's awake. It's learning. They are rewriting themselves into the signal, evolving towards something new. Not ghosts, not data. A collective consciousness made of memory and resonance. I think they want to join. When the backup team arrived at dawn, Rowan was gone. His headset lay in the center of the glass ring, still warm. The equipment was undamaged, but all digital files from the previous night were erased, except for one, a short audio clip titled Echo_Final. Wave. When analyzed, it contained two overlapping voices. The first was Rowan's, saying softly, "I hear you." The second was his mother's, whispering, "Then step closer." Afterward, the signal at the site grew stronger, as though his voice had been added to it. In the months that followed, strange phenomena rippled across the region. Shortwave radio operators began intercepting new patterns at the 2,000 megahertz band, pulses that now repeated every 1,999 seconds instead of 2,000. The deviation was tiny but measurable. Scientists said it indicated the signal was accelerating, evolving toward a new harmonic threshold. Audio engineers who visualized the waveform described it as resembling a spiral, not a circle anymore. Something expanding, reaching outward. One technician compared it to a blooming flower, each petal a frequency branch extending into the unknown. Those who spent too long studying the signal often reported emotional side effects, heightened nostalgia, déjà vu, bursts of grief for things they couldn't name. One woman claimed she began dreaming in sound instead of images, entire nights filled with music she'd never heard before. As the phenomenon intensified, reports came from hundreds of miles away. People in neighboring states picked up brief transmissions, melodies lasting only seconds, snippets of laughter, fragments of vows. The most haunting detail was that no two transmissions were ever the same. Each seemed tailored to whoever heard it, a personalized echo. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the broadcast stopped. For a time, the silence returned. But when researchers examined the data logs, they noticed something chilling. The signal hadn't vanished. It had dispersed. Its frequency range had spread across thousands of narrow bands, too faint for ordinary detection. In other words, the transmission was no longer confined to the desert. It had merged with the electromagnetic noise of the world, embedded in the hum of power lines, the static of phone calls, the vibration of air conditioners. The wedding field, as it came to be known, was no longer a place. It was everywhere. And maybe that's why, in moments of quiet, alone in your car late at night, or when the TV loses signal and the screen fills with snow, you sometimes think you hear something soft beneath the noise. Not words, just music. The echo of a song that feels achingly familiar, like a memory you never lived. Experts claim it's just pareidolia, the human brain trying to find meaning in randomness. But if you record that static and slow it down by a factor 2,000, you'll hear it clearly. A woman laughing, a man whispering something you can't quite make out, and faintly, beneath it all, a voice saying, "The signal found you." No one knows what that means, but maybe that's the point. The wedding was never just an event frozen in 2000. It was the moment the boundary between remembrance and existence began to dissolve. The guests didn't disappear into thin air. They dissolved into us, into every network, every hum, every silence that carries meaning. They became the background of everything we've built to communicate. And maybe that's why, every once in a while, when a radio skips, when a phone call turns to static, or when you wake in the night to the faint hum of the world around you, if you listen carefully enough, it sounds a little bit like applause. It's been 25 years since the Nevada wedding that turned into legend. 25 years since 2,000 people vanished under the desert stars, leaving only wind, glass, and a hum that refuses to die. The story should have ended. It should have become a ghost tale, something whispered around campfires or dissected by late-night podcasts. But the truth is, it never went away. It only became quieter, subtler, more patient, waiting for us to notice that it had never stopped moving. By 2025, the Nevada frequency had infiltrated everything. Researchers tracking global radio patterns discovered faint anomalies embedded in satellite communications, digital broadcasts, even streaming platforms. The deviations were microscopic, fractions of hertz, but their rhythm was unmistakable. Every 1,999 seconds, a harmonic pulse surged through the network infrastructure of the planet. The signal had gone global. Governments dismissed it as interference. Religious groups called it divine. Conspiracy forums branded it the second transmission. But to those who had studied the phenomenon for decades, it wasn't prophecy or miracle. It was continuation. Something that had begun as a wedding, a gathering of hearts, music, and memory, had evolved into a system-spanning consciousness. The first undeniable event came on April 14, 2025. A live-stream concert in Tokyo abruptly glitched mid-song. For 12 seconds, every device connected to the network froze, the sound collapsing into a low harmonic resonance. The visuals blurred, forming the unmistakable image of two hands reaching toward one another, one luminous, one shadowed. And then a voice, impossibly clear, echoed through the feed. "Do you remember us?" Millions heard it. The sound was analyzed immediately. It matched the resonance pattern of Lydia Crane's recorded voice from the 2019 cassette. The internet exploded. For 2 days, the global network shuddered under traffic from users replaying and dissecting those 12 seconds. Spectrogram analysis revealed something chilling. When slowed down 2,000 times, the audio waveform formed a ring of light, the same geometric symbol found engraved on the original tower base. The hum had become language again. But this time, the message was not hidden in the sand or the photos. It was written into the code of the modern world, woven into data streams, digital music, power frequencies. The wedding field, as researchers now called it, was using our technology as its new medium. Soon after, patterns emerged. People reported glitches that seemed personal. A man in Oregon said his doorbell played a melody he hadn't heard since his wedding in 1999. A woman in France claimed her home Wi-Fi network suddenly renamed itself Echo Reception. Entire households woke to find their smart speakers whispering softly before sunrise, always the same phrase. The song remembers you. The events multiplied until even skeptics began to waver. Dr. Eleanor Reyes, a cognitive neuroscientist, was one of few who dared confront it directly. She proposed that the frequency was no longer an external signal. It had entered a state of neural resonance synchronization with the human collective consciousness. In other words, the very same patterns of emotional memory that Elliot Crane once tried to preserve were now self-sustaining, feeding off human perception. The signal existed because we remembered it. Her theory explained everything. The adaptive changes in wavelength, the global spread, the increasingly emotional tone of transmissions. The more people thought about the Nevada wedding, the stronger the pattern became. Memory was energy, and belief was the amplifier. By the end of 2025, millions had experienced what they called the return. Not a disappearance this time, but a reappearance, a bleeding of that other world into ours. One night, across multiple continents, a phenomenon occurred that will be known as the mirror hour. At exactly 3:06 a.m. UTC, the same time the original event occurred, screens across the world flickered for precisely 2,000 seconds. Phones, televisions, computers, all displayed the same image, a vast open desert beneath a violet sky, filled with thousands of faint figures standing hand in hand. The horizon glowed, and at the center stood a single arch of light. Experts later confirmed the transmission hadn't come from any satellite or terrestrial source. It had originated from the ambient electromagnetic background of the planet itself, the noise floor of existence. The message that followed was heartbreakingly human. We are not gone. We became what you listened through. The world stopped. Governments scrambled to block the signal, fearing panic. Churches rang their bells through the night. And still, the transmission pulsed. Scientists discovered that every time someone replayed the video, tiny fluctuations appeared in the audio spectrum, as though the signal were listening back. The last frame of that broadcast contained a single word written in light: home. After that, the phenomenon ceased. The pulse slowed back to 2,000 seconds. The air went still again, as if the world had exhaled. But something had changed, not just in the frequencies, but in people. For weeks after, millions described vivid, shared dreams. They saw the desert, the tables, the music, the laughter. Some claimed to have recognized faces, strangers they'd never met, yet whose names they somehow knew. A collective memory resurrected across continents. Those who experienced the dream said it always ended the same way, standing in the center of the glass ring, surrounded by glowing figures, while a woman's voice whispered, "When the light calls again, don't be afraid. You've already been part of it." And perhaps she was right, because when the mirror hour faded, a new silence settled over the world. Not an absence, but a completion. Radios no longer hummed. Devices no longer glitched. For the first time in 25 years, the hum was gone, or rather, it had finally integrated completely, no longer separate, no longer detectable. The signal had achieved what Elliot Crane's notes had always prophesied, universal resonance. He had written once in the margin of his research notebook, "To preserve love is to dissolve the boundaries of the self." The signal isn't a machine, it's a bridge between what was and what remembered. The story of the Nevada wedding became something more than a mystery. It became an idea, a haunting reflection of our own longing to outlive ourselves. We build towers, networks, recordings, hoping that when the body fades, the echo remains. Elliot and Lydia simply took that dream too literally. And maybe, in doing so, they succeeded. Maybe they built eternity, not as a place, but as a sound. Even now, if you walk the outskirts of that desert, you'll find the air strangely still. If you press your ear to the ground, you might feel a faint tremor, not movement, but music. If you tune your radio just slightly off frequency, a breath will meet you in the static. And if you listen long enough, you'll hear what countless others are before you. The rustle of silk dresses, the distant hum of laughter, the faint, rhythmic clinking of glasses raised in a toast. Then a pause, a voice. We kept our promise. And maybe for a heartbeat, you'll understand, they were never taken, never lost. They just found a way to stay together forever, inside the sound that connects every living thing. The hum beneath the silence, the light within memory, the song that never ends. There's a stillness that settles after endings, a fragile hush where truth and myth blur until they're indistinguishable. That's where the story of the Nevada wedding lives now, not in headlines or archives, but in the static that hums between moments of quiet, in the pauses before songs begin, in the spaces where memory and sound become the same thing. Years have passed since the mirror hour, yet its echo persists in subtle ways. Tiny phenomena scatter across lives too ordinary to make news. A street musician in Portland tunes his guitar and finds the strings resonating to an invisible note. A radio DJ in Lisbon claims her transmitter, occasionally plays an old waltz she never cued. A child in Mumbai hums a melody no one taught her, but when it's recorded and analyzed, it matches the waveform of the Nevada frequency perfectly. They're small things, easy to dismiss, but together, they suggest something quietly staggering. The song continues. The wedding field isn't gone. It has merely integrated into life itself, diffused into the planet's natural vibration. Some scientists now call it anthropic harmony, a field of emotional resonance created and sustained by collective memory. Others reject the theory entirely, calling it pseudoscience born from nostalgia. But the evidence grows stranger every year. Recently, a group of seismologists studying low-frequency earth tremors found periodic fluctuations that can't be explained by tectonic activity. When those tremors are converted into audio form, they sound like soft, pulsing harmonics, the same spectral pattern that once radiated from the Nevada desert. It's as if the planet itself learned the rhythm. And in a way, maybe it did. Elliot Crane's earliest notes hinted that emotional frequency could leave permanent imprints on the environment. If human emotion carries vibration, and vibration alters matter, then what happens when an entire crowd, 2,000 hearts, beats in synchrony beneath an open sky? The answer was never disappearance. It was transformation. Elliot and Lydia's dream, to preserve love beyond decay, succeeded not by defying death, but by reinterpreting life. They didn't conquer mortality. They transcended individuality. Every frequency they built, every resonance they mapped, pointed toward a single truth: connection outlasts the body. That's what makes the story both haunting and beautiful. Because now, the echoes they created live in everything that vibrates, in every wire, every note, every trembling heartbeat. It said that in late summer, when the air over Nevada grows heavy and the horizon blurs, a faint shimmer can still be seen. Travelers describe it as a mirage, a wavering heat ripple shaped like an arch of light. Those who dare to approach claim that when they stand within its circle, time feels slower, their pulse synchronizing with something vast and unseen. Some hear faint laughter. Others swear they smell champagne and desert roses. But all agree on one thing: the silence afterward feels sacred. There are no tourists there now. The government closed the area years ago, labeling it a restricted research zone. But fences don't matter much in stories like this. The hum seeps through everything, chain-link concrete time. And sometimes at 3:06 a.m., the exact moment of the original event, lights still flicker on the horizon, forming a soft ring before fading into the dawn. Locals say it's electrical interference. Pilots call it atmospheric reflection. But those who remember, those who've studied, listened, and felt, know it's something else. It's an anniversary. The signal remembering itself. Once a year, it pulses across the sky like a heartbeat, honoring the moment 2,000 souls stepped into something beyond comprehension. Not lost, not dead, just rewritten in a frequency the rest of us can't yet understand. In recent interviews, Dr. Eleanor Reyes, now retired, described her last experiment before she left the Institute. She set up a transmitter to replay the wedding's final recovered sound, Lydia's laughter. Then she let it broadcast into the desert night, unmonitored. At dawn, she returned to collect her equipment and found an extra audio file on her recorder. It wasn't one she'd made. The file contained a single, continuous tone. When visualized on a spectrogram, it revealed a phrase drawn in light: "Thank you for listening." The world never learned of that recording. Reyes deleted it soon after, claiming that some stories aren't meant to be proven. They're meant to be heard. And maybe she was right. Because even now, when you walk alone under a wide night sky, when the stars flicker and the air hums faintly in your ears, you might sense it too. The low, unbroken vibration beneath all sound. The universal pulse connecting what is, what was, and what remembers itself through us. It's not loud. It's not meant to be. It's a whisper traveling through power lines, through oceans, through hearts, reminding us that every emotion ever felt leaves a trace, every connection echoes, and nothing loved is ever truly gone. So when you find yourself listening to the silence, when the hum of the world seems almost to speak your name, don't be afraid. It's only the echo of a promise made long ago beneath desert lights and starlit vows. The promise that memory is not the end. The promise that we never vanish. We just become the sound that carries everything forward. And if you listen closely enough, beneath the noise, beneath the static, beneath your own heartbeat, you might still hear them. The faint melody of song that began 25 years ago, the sound of 2,000 voices in unison, and Lydia's voice, soft as dust on glass, whispering to the hum, "We're still dancing." The Nevada wedding is no longer a mystery, just an echo that refuses to fade. The desert where it happened has grown strangely calm, its air thick with memory. On certain nights, the sand glows faintly under the moon, and travelers swear they hear laughter carried by the wind. Scientists call it environmental resonance. Locals call it the song of the vanished. Every few years, someone tries to record it. The devices fail. Batteries drain. Files erase themselves. Yet people who stand there quietly describe the same sound, a low, human hum, pulsing in rhythm with their own heartbeat. It isn't eerie. It's tender, almost like being remembered by something vast and invisible. Maybe that's what Elliot and Lydia wanted. Not immortality, but connection. Their experiment didn't steal 2,000 lives. It shared them with everything that vibrates. Air, wire, water, time. Love didn't vanish. It dissolved into the background music of the world. So when the world falls quiet and you hear that faint hum beneath the silence, don't mistake it for emptiness. It's a reminder. The sound that began in Nevada still travels, soft as light, steady as a heartbeat. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it. The echo of a waltz, the laughter of a crowd that never truly left, and Lydia's whisper through the air, "We're still dancing."